Hello and welcome to the New Zealand Retirement Podcast. I'm your co-host and registered financial advisor, Raiden Page, alongside my co-host and fellow financial advisor, John Miller, CFP. This is the podcast that brings you all you need to know about retiring in the New Zealand context. So without further delay, welcome to this week's episode. So this is a person, we could put that up on Couple if we want.
Mm-hmm.
May as well. Living expenses for this person, let's call it 60,000. They own their own home.
If you look at the Massey study, that's reasonably modest. Still seem hard to believe, but going by the Massey study figures, they seem pretty high. But I guess it is what it is.
As we're sort of talking about this morning, a lot of the big expenses have been going up. Well, really fixed expenses, the likes of rates,
Yes,
property, insurance, all those they can go up pretty fast. So one thing that we're sort of saying to advisors and probably clients should be thinking about as well, that your tax rate is not going to be CPI if you're retiring. You're going to be facing a higher CPI rate than everybody else. Your inflation rate might be 3%. If you're allocating more than, say, 20, 25% towards those high inflation fixed costs, then you're going to actually be 3.5 potentially long term, because rates probably going to be going up 7%. Health insurance is going to be going up 7% on average, but because you're getting older as well, that could be 10%, 15% a year.
Yeah, I think they said medical costs on average at the moment is about 22% per annum.
You would hope, if we're looking at, this whole period of age 65 to 90, you would hope that it's transitory.
Yeah.
Those ones, you hope it's not going to be 22 every year.
My God, yes. Yeah.
Hopefully we're over the average for those. And that health insurance might come down at least a little bit, 15%. But we can at least have those conversations with clients, right?
And according to Massey, looking at Massey, the Massey study, the no frills weekly budget for two-person household living in either Auckland, Wellington or Christchurch, no thrills was $937 a week. The frills budget was $1,780 a week. Big difference.
Yes, that was for a couple,
That's for a couple who are bringing in approximately roughly $800 a week.
Yeah, and also just helpful to put it in context, because that no frills, that is, so we've got a distribution of, say, all people in retirement, right? So you've got people in the middle, which is most people, the average. They're going to be spending a certain amount. The people way up here on the distribution are going to be spending a lot more. So what we're doing is we're taking that whole distribution and we're saying 40%, at that 40% mark, that's our no frills. So there's still loads of people that aren't spending that much. It's important to think about where you sit on the distributions. You don't actually need that much to live in retirement. It's just an observation of what people are actually spending today based on those groups. And you might decide that you're actually really frugal and you don't even need the no frills. You can go even lower than that. But it's a good indication of how people are actually living today and the inflation they're experiencing.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's do some bond allocation. Yeah, so now we've got 40% bonds in our portfolio, and it's looking pretty good. New Zealand Super's making up $43,000 a year out of that, and then living expenses $60K. Very nice. We'll go to our chance of success. This was $60,000 total, which I know is still pretty relaxed. So that's not bad though if you own your own home and you're on a pretty no frills budget. But now we can look at $70,000 a year, keeping in mind that it's currently set to matching inflation. Not everybody needs to match inflation for their spending. Might only be a part. But you can see the impact of going up even $10,000 a year pulls it right back.
It's funny too when you talk to people. I'm talking to some a couple in their mid-30s, no kids. They've actually got freehold home, and we've actually got freehold home and an awful lot of equity in their rental property. They have huge amounts of surplus, so they could actually retire that debt pretty quickly as well. But it's funny with expectations. I asked the female partner, what expectations do you have at retirement? And it's quite common for somebody in that age group to say, oh, we'd probably want about $200,000 a year. But in reality, there's an awful lot of people, in retirement, they just don't spend that much money. They just don't.
And that's actually, we could look at the effect on that. What if you just, yes, there's going to be some underlying costs here that are that it would be higher inflation wise. But
Mhm.
if we just said we can spend this amount of money each year without adjusting it for inflation, we're going to cut down expenses as time goes on.
Mhm.
If you want to know what that looks like, you can have a look here. You can see you pretty smoothly start spending less and less and less.
Absolutely.
You get some longevity out of those funds that way. But now, so we've got to, in planning, we actually cut that up into essential spending and non-essential spending. What I found really interesting, John, is your tool that you work with, SortMe, because when we use that, we can actually cut up the expenses that that the client will be paying, right? And you see which areas they're in. And you can go,
Absolutely.
okay, is this high inflation area or high inflation area, low inflation area? And that can give you a good idea to split it out in terms of those expenses as well. So you can set up your own
Very
sort
true.
of inflation expectations. We'll just continue where we left off from last time because
Did you manage to?
I think we're having a good conversation. I ended up creating a different case study, which I think is a little easier to use now that it's populated with some somewhat realistic numbers. This case study, we're saying they're a traveling couple, so they want to spend a bit on traveling. So what they're going to do is they're going to spend $4,000 every year on travel, and they're going to spend $10,000 a year on international travel. So fine, here's them meeting that goal, $10,000 every 3 years because of that domestic and international aligning. And because of that, they get to spend $14,000 in that year on international travel, or they could split it up if they want to. They'd probably do the lot on international travel. So here's us building up their assets over time. So they should max out at around $2.5 million in today's dollars. You can see inflation adjusted, it's a little bit.
Well, in dollars, yeah.
So I've got an 89% chance of meeting their needs as we've laid them out throughout retirement.
What's their age? What's the youngest age?
55 down here. And I've got bonds kicking in at age 65. Maybe realistically we'd have that slide up on a more regular scale up to 40, but for argument's sake, 40% bonds throughout the whole retirement.
What do you see as a success rate, as in, an appropriate success rate? Because I know we use, through the people that we work with who are mentioned, have a rule of thumb.
Mine's 75.
Okay, so they work on a calculation, which is basically the amount of time between their age now and, say, the end of the plan at, say, 90, whatever that age that number is, and then subtract that number from 100, and that would be the on or around the success rate you'd like them to have at that age. And then each year, of course, by doing that calculation, that would increase each year. Because clearly, if you have somebody at 55,
right, okay.
If you have somebody at 55 with 100% success rate, my experience would be is there'd be enough money there until they were probably 120.
Yeah, exactly. The more buffer that you build in to increase that success rate, the more likely you are to completely overshoot the need.
Yeah, that's what we work for. What duration from age now to 90, that number subtract from 100, that would be the number that they should be sitting on at that point of time.
So I'm just curious, what happens if we try to pull back retirement by 2 years? So there's David retiring 2 years earlier. Here's Mariana. Oh, and they still look pretty good. Let's look at chance success again. It's down at 77. So you can see here as well, which is what I really like about these Monte Carlos, is here's your average line. So on average, they should be ending up with about $2 million.
Yes.
But in the bottom 10% of cases, they're running out of money at 83. So it's still very good for 77% chance.
Absolutely.
We would just have to manage it if we are starting to see this sort of bottom 10% materialize. And we can actually sort by results as well and look at some of the worst and go, well, what happened? And I'll tell you what happens every single time. That withdrawal rate goes through the roof.
Right, yeah.
So as soon as we hit over 10% withdrawal rate, we know we're in trouble. And that's where we'd actually intervene in planning to say, okay, we actually need to cut down expenses now, because if we continue on this trajectory, we're going to get in trouble. We're going to end up spending all the money before we need to.
Yeah, it's a two-edged sword, isn't it? One hand, you don't want them to run out of money, but on the other hand, you don't want them to be the richest people in the cemetery either, because that's not going to help them at all.
Yeah.
You want them to, enjoy as much of that money as possible. Otherwise, what was the point?
Yeah, exactly. And that's also why it's useful to have the ongoing planning conversation, I think.
Absolutely.
Because we can do this at, age 65, and it kind of looks like we're setting the ship off. We're just going, oh, yep, you can retire now, and we'll let the ship go, and whatever happens, happens. But that's not actually reality. Because 3 years in, markets can go really, really well, And we could just entirely reset spending. We can go, actually, you get to spend an extra $10,000 a year from this point onwards. So even Monte Carlos aren't totally realistic because we would react. And our withdrawals is our tool to do that.
Oh, that looks good. Yeah, because going by my rule of thumb, we'd have we'd be reasonably satisfied at 65%. So that's
yeah. We can even visualize that. Like, what if we want to retire at 61 instead, and we can see that it's starting to pull back? There's your 56%, and we can see more of that distribution is now coming down here. You're probably at pretty close to a 50-50 of outcome. Oh, the other thing I want to show as well, because this is actually really interesting, is if we come over here and we increase the risk. So instead of that 60-40, we're going to bring the bonds in at 20%. And just look at what happens to the chance of success.
Oh, look at that. Yep.
So the average is now coming out here because as we're taking on more risk, on average, we're going to be receiving better return. But there's also a higher disparity of outcome, meaning that if we get really bad markets, it's coming back even further because we don't have the bonds to help us recover from it. Yeah. Just think that's interesting.
It is interesting. Right. So you can actually see what could happen.
Yeah. And it's nice because being able to compare all of these, we can say, oh, well, when do we actually want to retire? Because now we can see at 63, we can retire. Do we want to retire at 63? What does that mean for us and our plans for working?
Yep. And I'm writing the plan for somebody right now. The couple is 62 and 63, and they are definitely retiring. That's what they want to do. They've just sold their house and they're off down the country to build a house or buy a house a bit cheaper, and that's it. Fair enough too.